This is Black Berea. I'm Israel.
I'm Richard.
And we're looking at hermeneutics today.
Yay.
And that sounds like a big word, so break it down for us. What is
Break it down for us,
hermeneutics?
brother. Hermeneutics is essentially how do you interpret the Bible, how do you divide it, as Timothy said, as Paul says in Timothy, rightly dividing the word of truth is something that Christians have to engage with.
So I'm opening my Bible, I'm reading it.
How do you slice it up?
Okay.
How do you understand it today?
So what are the, how would I do it? How do I interpret my Bible as I'm reading it? Yeah.
So first and foremost, obviously, when you open up any book, we're going to try and understand what it's saying grammatically.
Yeah.
So at a grammatical level, we have to look at, are similes being used? Is this poetry? Is this a letter? Is this a narrative? Is it at a fixed point in time then, or is it dealing with is it dealing over a particular period? Do you know what I mean? And those kind of things. We want to look at what just came before it, what comes straight after it. So we want to look at the immediate context, the flow of an argument, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So at first level, we always want to look grammatically. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, definitely. So what I'm hearing from you is that we have to not just read it as some abstract set of words, but really try to.
It's not just a book of proverbs. It contains proverbs. But it's not just a book.
So
of proverbs.
we can't go in and say, okay, let's just run straight into Mark 5, verse 1. Forget everything else around it and say we're going to interpret it. We have to look before, after. Think about the history of it. Mark is different to the period of history of like Isaiah, for example. So saying you have to factor all those things in.
Yeah, and that's the second point essentially.
Okay.
Find out where the text actually falls in human history, or more specifically in the line of redemptive history. So in the plan of God's redeeming purposes, where does this text fall? Somebody like somebody like Daniel, for example, wouldn't have had the epistles. Someone like Samuel wouldn't have the book of Daniel. So you want to kind of understand that Revelation is progressive in the sense that it develops over time. We understand more over time, and we have more and more of the scriptures over time to work with.
Right. So someone like Paul, who's writing the epistles, has the Old Testament to work with, whereas Daniel wouldn't have the New Testament.
He wouldn't have the New Testament.
So we're not going to go to Daniel and be like, oh, he used this word, which probably referring to Mark or Peter. We're not going to say that, but with Paul, we could say that, oh, he's referring to Isaiah.
Yeah,
and that's going to change how we interpret. Okay.
Exactly. Because then that means Paul's actually interpreting the scriptures, right? And whereas Daniel is probably given at a point fresh revelation. Do you know what I mean? Directly divine from God. Well, all of it's divine from God, but you know what I mean? It's Paul's actually in God's sovereign plan, working with the text that has already been given. And Daniel does that at times as well, as does an Isaiah. So then I think first and foremost, at a grammatical level, what's the text saying? Then we have to say, where does it actually occur within redemptive history? But then at the final point, you also want to then say, how does that relate to us today? And at that point, you've kind of got, this is particularly called a redemptive historical hermeneutic. You're trying to understand what has occurred in redemptive history that almost shift text from an Exodus talking about the Passover lamb and stuff like that. How do we then understand that as the church today, who have not just left in Egypt and as God's chosen people in the land of Israel, for example?
Because at face value, you could almost feel like, okay, that's the children of Israel.
So it's separate. It's got nothing to do with us, which is what I thought for a while. I remember growing up trying to figure out, Old Testament talks about Israel, New Testament talks about the church. And I just thought that, and I just had a blurry divide in my mind. But what you realise is in Matthew 5, for example, Christ actually says, he came, he fulfills the Old Testament and the law and the prophets, essentially, which is a Hebrew idiom, a Jewish idiom for the whole of the Old Testament. So the law being the Torah, the prophets being Isaiah's, Jeremiah's, etc., minor major prophets, but then also it includes the writings. By the way, the phrase still carries around today, the law, the prophets and the writings, is something that they still say today. It's definitely something that, so Christ is, when he says I fulfill the whole of the law and the prophets, he's not just saying I fulfill a few prophecies. He's saying I fulfill stories. I'm fulfilling covenants. I'm fulfilling all the various shadows and types. I am fulfilling the prophecies as well. But you know, I am there in the narrative. I'm there in the themes. I'm there. As one man says, I'm Christ on every page.
Right,
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And only then can you really say, okay, when you look at the Old Testament, you look at it with new eyes, because you essentially say every single thing is pointing to and has been fulfilled by this Christ. And therefore everything that we read in the Old Testament is profitable for teaching, reproof, rebuke, and instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be fully equipped and thoroughly furnished for every good work.
Thank you so much for that, Richard, man. I hope this has sparked an interest to study more about hermeneutics and interpretation, and for even you to go read your Bibles and to think, okay, based on what's been said, let me think about the context, let me think about the grammar, and so on, and so that you can go and interpret the scriptures
correctly. Rightly divide the word of truth.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm Israel. No, I'm not. I'm Richard.
I'm Israel.
And we're Black Berea. Cool.